Welcome to the Unraveling Onion Podcast.
All right, well, welcome to Unraveling Onion, everybody. This is Isaac here, and Chelsea is upstairs hanging out with our toddler right now, and my buddy Brandon's wife, Mary, and I have Brandon sitting here with me, Brandon Jimenez, good friend of mine, and, you know, I've been interested in having guests on my podcast, and Brandon and we have a very cool relationship where we literally can go on and on and on and on and talk about anything. And man, we go down the rabbit hole, don't we?
Definitely, man.
I mean, I think we go, where do we go? Religion to philosophy to science and I mean,
Man. To what could have been, and then also the Avengers, which are pretty bad. They're pretty awesome.
yeah, dude, it's crazy what's going on with movies. And
Yeah.
I feel like everyone's going down these rabbit holes because I think everything's just connecting. Everyone's so absorbed in media and news and all this stuff. And I think that's also kind of part of the problem too.
Yeah, for sure, man. There's a lot of content, a lot more than there was just not even like 20 years ago.
Yeah. So anyway, hey man, I wanted to talk to you about a couple things because you and our lives have kind of aligned in a lot of ways. We're both happily married. We both, we both have a brand new child, and I have another one on the way.
Mm-hmm.
And recently, I think we've both kind of faced a road of spirituality that's kind of been weird for both of us. We're very science minded. We are fans of the science community, and I think we both kind of taken some interesting twist in our lives lately. And I don't know, man. I think science in my world has been my everything. I have listened to every Neil deGrasse Tyson, Christopher Hitchens, Dawkins lecture, and just kind of connect. I guess I've always been a seeker. I've always been a seeker of science and why is everything the way it is.
Oh, yeah.
And I think something that's happened to me recently and is just I'm still a seeker. And there's this thing that where you see so much spirituality and you see so much connection of things that just you can't explain. And there's a lot of people out there that were seekers as well, that looked for answers beyond science because you can't explain narratives and some of the things positive things that have happened in their life because they believed that it would happen in their life. And I think I really made an effort to seek that out, even just to find out if I was wrong, because that's what a scientist does. You keep looking for it, and you look for it, and you look for it, and look for it, and say, hey, I want it. If it's not there, I'm gonna make sure it's not there.
Yeah.
And I think we both kind of probably face that road. I didn't grow up religious. My parents were kind of open to me going anywhere I wanted to, but Chelsea was very religious when we first met. She was 15 years old, and I didn't continue that relationship when we were younger because I didn't want her to ever resent me because I didn't think I was going to be able to go cross over that line to be a spiritual person. And I knew that's what she wanted. And it's funny because, years later we've reconnected and she's been stabbed enough by religion where she's kind of been turned off a little bit. And I've kind of gotten more curious about it. And now we're at a place where we're both very spiritual. And you kind of have a similar story to some degree because you weren't very religious when you met Mary, right?
Definitely. So, I grew up in a very Catholic type of house, but not strictly. It was just my mom took me to Catholic church, many Sundays up to a certain point. And then it was kind of like she asked us, like, you still want to go to this thing? Because you don't seem like, because I kind of really did hate it. And I think a lot of a lot of people who grew up in a Catholic type of upbringing also share the sentiment where it's just so ritualistic. And so, I don't remember a single sermon that stood out to me only because it just didn't feel like it was authentic. It just was just more repetition and ritual because the guy, like most of the sermon was just somebody talks about a few things and then we just say this really long prayer. It just didn't really
know these stories because they're true. And that was kind of all I remember from church is, hey, this is what happened.
Yes, and it was just, that's all it was. It wasn't personal. It was just speaking out up to a bunch of people, and then you kneel and do some, process. And it just didn't feel, it felt weird, And then in my teenage years in high school, I just felt like, you know what, this religion thing's not for me. And, my history teacher at the time showed a bunch of documentaries about the Crusades. And, I just looked at what religion did in the past and how destructive it seemed to be. And I immaturely attributed all of it just to religion and said, oh, it's evil. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. So I kind of just quote unquote left the faith. And I didn't really kind of look back, and I kind of proclaimed that I was an atheist and an agnostic person. I was actually kind of almost even nasty to people who were religious.
Me too.
Sometimes,
for sure.
you know what I'm saying? And, until I met my wife, who, on the flip side, she also grew up in a very religious upbringing, raised very strictly Christian. And, by the time I had met her, she had already read the Bible several times. And, the one thing when we would get into the spiritual discussions,
It's intimidating.
It is intimidating.
Oh, man.
But, one thing she would ask me when she got into we got into spiritual conversation, she's like, she would share what she believed, then I would share what I would believe. And then it would go back to, how can you believe that? I'm like, well, because everyone could believe what they want to believe. And that's my, but Cher's like, but how can you believe this specifically about the Bible and or Christianity when you haven't read it? And that argument got to me because I'm a reader, man. Not then, excuse me. I hated reading growing up, to be honest with you. But I'm not so much a reader. I'm an explorer. I want to get the answer. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely, I love math. I was math all day. I want to know. And how can I actually, it was so blunt. It was just like, I guess she's right. How could I have a perspective on something? How could I keep, because my only perspective was a bunch of documentaries, every movie reference, every other thing, how we talk about it, and the guys passing out flyers and telling you you're going to go to hell because your skirt's too short.
It just seemed like magic. Why would I read a magic book?
Exactly. Or fantasy or made up or no one's, one thing I would say that would give me comfort to kind of make an excuse to not even explore it would be like, no one today is alive that was alive back then to even verify even an inkling of this being true or not. So why are we doing this?
I always use the example of, how many books are there about Elvis that he didn't do any drugs? And there are half the books say he didn't do drugs. The other half says he did do drugs. There's how many cookbooks of Elvis's favorite food. Right. And I mean, Elvis was not that long ago, and we have a million interpretations of different Elvises.
Right.
And so I kind of looked at that as, I guess I looked at when you read a book, you read it to the facts, and then I kind of woke up to the idea is, wait a second, the truths aren't in, whether the truths are in the details of what happened and how, David, Goliath, and all the characters, but the truth wasn't in the facts and the details. The truths are in the moral truths and the narratives in the story. And as I'm about a third in the Bible because I've recently kind of jumped on this train. And I think when you're a kid and you go to church, you just say, oh, there's a bunch of stories. Moses parted the water and Jesus, died and resurrected. And you're just like, it sound like mystical stories. Okay. There's a lot of fables and a lot of, great stories out there with good moral lessons. Why the Bible whoop-de-doo. But as I've grown up, I took some influence from Jordan Peterson, who kind of connected this idea of, you take on responsibility, and when people look to you, you got to be a person that knows which way to go when you encounter any situation. And you need to know how to act, and you know how to take on suffering with nobility, and which is what Jesus is. He held the cross, embraced the suffering of the cross, the ultimate meta idea of suffering, and he carried it uphill. And, this idea of you take it on, you might wear yourself to death, but you will flourish if you come out the other end, whether it's facing your dragon or taking on Goliath. It's like, you got to go into stuff even though they're scary and even though they're hard. And that's the concept of everything. You work out hard, you'll come out the other end stronger. If you brush your teeth, you'll have healthy teeth. It's like, that's a work you got to put into stuff, and it's not necessarily fun, but that's what life is. Life is suffering. It's taking on the world. And I think as now I have a family, and now that people look to me and rely on me, I better know where I stand morally. And the book of the Bible is, hey, when you come to this situation, turn left. When you go to this situation, turn right. in narrative terms or moral terms. And I thought, holy crap, like, why didn't anyone tell me that it wasn't about the literary truth? Because every time I went to church on, during the holidays, it was Jesus Jesus loves you and God, and it just seems so literal that this guy named Jesus and this, entity in the sky was looking after, and I was like, that's weird. But once I learned, wait a second, the narratives almost give it the divinity because they are in every single person forever. In fact, there's this idea of the Greek mythology, which I thought was super interesting, is that we were the playthings of the gods, because the god of rage, the god of sadness, the god of love, they all inserted emotions in you because they're in all people. And you just assume they're in all people forever. So why isn't that a god, those emotions? And so it's a different idea of not man in the sky, but structures of reality that will indefinitely better your life throughout time. And I think a family helped me face that. And I think Chelsea was a huge part of that too, is why do I want to be a better person suddenly?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny you say it that way, because it was, before I had my little one with my wife, she already had two with the previous marriage. And, I'm stepping in here being a stepfather. What does that look like? How does that, what do you do? And there's also stories about that in the Bible, and
you don't want to trust average Joe with that.
Right, of course.
Like, oh, here's Joe Schmo, who is a stepdad. Here's his Stepdad for Dummies book. And you're like, well, Joe Schmo is nothing. But then you look at a Bible and you're like, wait a second. This has shaped all of our civilization throughout time. And people are still following the lead of the Bible.
Yeah, it was kind of like one of the last, yes, there's been others, but one of the perma-last, kind of good human collaborative experiences, 66 books put together of all this pain and misery, but yet happiness and joy, and what it means to live these type of central truth narratives, is like what you're saying, where really, yeah, you can get lost in the details, but the main point is that all these things are still here with us today. All these stories, all these narratives, that hasn't changed. And yet there is some discussion about what is better than some of what, than living some of that pain and what have you. Only because thousands of years ago, people were still doing the same thing in a different context, where donkeys were more relevant.
and no pain's new. It's all the pain and all your emotions you've ever dealt with, every drama situation, everything you've ever dealt with has been faced a million times, way more than a million times, millions or trillions of times throughout history. And to think that some of these narratives that were in the oldest books and our oldest wisdom, from even Greek to Mesopotamia, you can look back at God of Marduk, and there's just so many different ways that people personified these emotions people are dealing with, just to give you a little wisdom on how to act day to day.
Yeah, for sure. There's also a lot of mystery around it, because as we discover more and more about these, ancient texts, there's so much context lost, but at the same time, as we discover new, ancient civilizations that were lost, it kind of helps put the puzzle pieces back together, the timeline, back together. There's really interesting tidbits also, even in the Bible, that kind of spark my interest. For instance, the mention of gold, within the very first couple of verses of Genesis. Why? Why was that even? Why did God is making the earth in 7 days, and God looks at it and it's like, oh, that was good, and then all these other cool things, and then all of a sudden it's a very short time, and then there was gold, and it's like, wait, what? Why? What? So it's I like looking at that stuff too whenever I go read the Bible, because it's there are just so many things that are, or in the multiple translations too. For instance, the word jackal gets mistranslated or cross-translated, I guess, if that's even a word, to the word dragon. So,
what do you think of the fact that there are these other interpretations? I have this book that Chelsea let me borrow, she had, and I'm now reading, and I can't even think of the title of it, but it's about esoteric thinking. Have you dove into that type of stuff?
Not so much.
Well, they're like connecting God to the Greek gods and saying that Lucifer and
Okay,
Venus
then yes, so.
and that Saturn and Satan, and that there's actually two different devils if you really look into the literature and the interpretations and I'm just thinking, man, no wonder people obsess about going to this every Sunday and then reading a million books about this, because there is so much mystery, as you said earlier. Is you can almost connect all these stories to other stories of thousands of years earlier.
It's the same mystery that they were battling with. It's just in a different context. We're in a different context. You know,
But-
we have more information. We have the internet. We're we're able to either say yes or no or determine that's more valid and that's more valid than the previous people before. But we're doing the same exercise. You know
But
what I'm
doesn't
saying?
that just show the divinity in the stories? Because the story, you can interchange the characters. You can say, okay, well, not Loki and Thor, but Cain and Abel. It's like Cain and Abel or Loki and Thor. You can interchange, who's the hero myth in every different kind of character in every kind of situation. And I think that's where the divinity is. We all know what a hero looks like. We all know what redemption looks like. We all know what suffering looks like. And we know what the evil of all evils is. I mean, you take a bully in a movie, well, you just take that to the meta level and you put that in a story. And then you take the meta good guy and you put that in a story. And you find these translations throughout all history. So where the divinity lies is in that archetypal structure that all of civilization has been based on. Hi, Tesla. My daughter Tesla just entered the room.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, isn't that where the divinity is? We're so separate from these ideas of how we're connected and how we act that that's why we're obsessed. And if we can get obsessed about it, we know we can act better throughout time because we know what turns to make when they approach us and when life hits us. And I mean, man, you just told me a cool story about how, you just bought a new house and then suddenly you were jobless and you had to face a lot of. Tell me a little bit about that story, because I don't want to give it all away and I don't know all the details of it.
Yeah, for sure. So, I was working downtown Denver. I was making decent money, and, we had saved up enough to put down on a house. You know what I mean? So between my wife's income and that income and, between having a new baby and all this sort of stuff, we had all the savings. We were going to move into a new house. So we go through the house finding process and the house buying process, and we're going to close on this house. And the day before I go to close on the house, my job decided to lay me off, and it was super impactful. I mean, it's like, how am I going to get a job fast enough to, be able to pay my mortgage?
And baby.
I just had a brand new baby. He's only a couple months old. It's like, I'm in the middle of moving right now. I mean, it was a blessing in disguise because then I didn't have to go to work and I could help move the whole house. But then I'm sitting there in February in a really low point, and then the job hunt happens, and it's like, okay, I'm going to job after job after job. I interviewed worse than I ever had interviewed ever. I don't know what it was. It was just like a funk. It was just like, I don't know. Like, it's just my confidence was just shot. Like, I just wasn't me. Like I knew I'm really skilled. They would have a conversation with me. Like, I know a lot of stuff, and I would get into a room and I was freezing. I don't know what it was, So I took a break for a week. I
did some mindfulness stuff.
A couple of good sermons came through Flatirons, which was great. Kind of empowered me. And then I had this really, really, really good meditation session. It was a visualization meditation session. We had watched this documentary, Heal, by the way, which, take it for what it is. I mean, there's a lot of people who make fun of that kind of documentary. I took it very, hey, anything's possible. I've been proven wrong so many thousands of times that even crazy things like this seem less crazy or less, ridiculous when you really consider all variables at hand. But anyways, that documentary is about, mind over matter, that faith can heal, that you can heal yourself through strong belief. And I do kind of actually support that notion quite a bit, especially if you look at just the placebo effect and how that affects, drugs that get launched in the pharmaceutical industry, which we could touch on that in a second. But basically, I I watched that documentary. It was really powerful for me. I started meditating and doing yoga every day, and then there was this very powerful visualization meditation that I had that just had this monk talk about, hey, you're on a beach and you're dragging an anchor, and it's just anchor, and it's tied around your waist, and it's digging into your freaking skin, and it's just the chains are just pinching you and everything, and you get to this box, with this rope that's been digging into you. It's not because it wasn't chains, it's a rope, and then you open up this chest and you find this sword, and it has your name on it. It's been waiting here forever, and you turn around, you slice the rope off, and he's going through all this stuff, right? But the point is, I was really into it, and the way he described it, he sets it up, and all it really was just, really good, powerful visualization.
But when you released it,
when I released it, it
was
so
real.
Good. It was real. It was like I needed that. I even think I shed tears down my eyes. You know what I mean? Which, whatever. But the point being is that right after that crazy moment of mindfulness and then this, like I said, the sermon that we heard that week, and then that documentary that I saw, and then all the things about positive affirmation, The Secret, that was a great movie, book, whatever. Take it all with a grain of salt. But when you put it into practice, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make it through this. You know what I'm saying? This is going to happen, and I just take it day by day and just relax and just, don't overstress about it and just keep it. I'm going to keep doing this because that release was so good. And then what's that?
Your job offer right there. Right?
And then I got 2 job offers at the same time. I went into the interview. I crushed both interviews. And at the end of the second interview, the other job was already giving me an offer. They offered me $10,000 more than what I asked for. And then the other job came back and was like, "Oh, can we hire you?" I'm like, "Sorry, they just gave me more than what I asked for." So I was turning down somebody as I had been turned down 3-4 times the month before.
But isn't that crazy? It's like, there's a lot of atheists out there that don't believe in God, but they negotiate with the future constantly.
Yeah, they ask the universe all the time. How many times when I was an atheist driving in the car, I'm like, oh my God, please.
What is that?
And
that's the thing. It's like we talk about, call it visualization, call it positive affirmations, call it whatever you want, call it prayer. And it's all the same thing. We all know that if you in fact, there's a scientist I listened to, and he said, hey, what you do is you have a bunch of neurons connected to your history. And whether good or bad, if you have bad experiences in the past, that's what your neural networks are connected to, those negative things. So when you move forward, you're like, oh, I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to avoid that. I'm not going to take on that. I'm not going to take. But with this religious mindset, even if it's not religious, so just go whatever you want to call it, we all act as if there is a power of future, of potential.
The phrase is faith-based.
Yeah. Faith-based. And you want to call it faith-based? Fine. Call it visualization. Call it your whatever sciencey terms like that.
It's just what you believe.
But that's not science. I'm sorry. Negotiating with the future is not science. If you connect the neural network to positive things in the future, then when you approach those things, it's not this scary thing. You're like, I'm ready to approach it. I'm ready to take it on, and I can do it. Well, that's a way that is proven method by science. In fact, other biblical things are proven by science too. You talk about fasting, you talk about sacrifice. You know what? If you sacrifice something now, it's not about losing that thing in the scientific sense. It's about opportunities you gain with the time or resources that you actually put into those sacrifices. So when you talk about science, where is science on that? How do you get a science book and say, hey, this is how you negotiate with the future?
I'm so glad you asked, because I don't have the best answer in the world, but I'll tell you this. For a long time, religion was science. It explained why things were the way they were and how things worked. And then, then you have Newton, and then you have Galileo, and then you have Enlightenment, then you have Renaissance, then you have all these awesome players who come in and say, no, it's not the rain god that's giving you rain. It's the cloud. It's precipitation. It's not this. It's physics. It's motion. It's science, right? And so what happened was that religion for so long didn't have the language it needed to describe things that were not necessarily so divine, that gave people the freedom and liberty when they realized it wasn't so divine and it was kind of more scientific, which have people turn their back on religion. But then we come back to today where we realize, well, it looks like science isn't equipped with the language to describe what religion has known for thousands of years, which is mind over matter, which we have a phrase for forever and translated into 1,000 different places. But the point being is it's your what you believe. Apparently, what you believe is actually stronger than the physical atomical like space and how things are going. You have quantum physicists going so deep, trying to analyze the universe particle by particle, and they come to this point where they realize, well, once you get small enough, particles can sometimes exist both places at the same time. They can exist at all places at the same time and then converge into a single place when it's observed. There's all these...
And they just added labels.
They just added labels.
Label. You are, but really you're just a thing of, this is not a shelf. This is not a computer. It's just a conglomerate of photons and matter, and we just added labels to each one of those things.
Yes, and then they realize all these weird behaviors that don't actually follow the laws of Newtonian physics, right? Because that's not how physics works. You can't just be Isaac can't exist in the kitchen and down here at the same time, and only when I look at him does he exist in one of those places.
Yeah, just because I measured you,
right? That doesn't make any. That's like what?
And then we're creating all these new theories on what could multiverses and string theory, and we're trying. Right? And then you're like, well, that's still science.
But it's not though, because you look at the ancient texts, and this is what they were saying: we're all connected. If a particle can exist at any place at any time, we're all connected, and they knew that. And there's something actually spiritual in that quantum realm that we're just now discovering at the science area. And it turns out that science and religion are starting to converge because they're finally talking the same language. I know we talked about programming earlier, but it turns out that when you actually have the communication device to translate what the heck is going on between these two seemingly different paradigms, they are one and the same. You know what I'm saying? You can't have one without the other, because we still don't know what happens after we die, despite whatever any other human has told you, other than anyone who has a near-death experience, who has the best possible chance to tell you what probably happens when you die.
Or taking psychedelics.
Or taking psychedelics, which will give you a new realm of what may happen when you die, depending on the psychedelic especially. I mean, we really still don't even know that. They've been wondering this since humanity has been humanity. Like, there's all these other questions, but at the same time, again, we're not going to get the answer if we still have this fence in between religion and science, because really we just need to be equipped with the language to describe the truth between the both.
And just because you discover some truths you can't just throw out the whole book, because it's ingrained in us at this point. It's part of our evolutionary growth. It's how we act and how we survive and how we get along in the same room. It's our whole civilization has been birthed from what we've learned in religion. And, I like to look at it this way. There's matter and what matters. And there's a realm of how to act in the world that a science book can only do so much. And you got to negotiate with the future, and you got to know what to do with your life. And you're not even the same person you were. Like, what did they say? That all the atoms in your body aren't in your body anymore. You've replaced essentially every atom in your body with new ones. Well, what does that mean? What am I still here? Am I not here? Because a science book would tell me that all the atoms that are in my body are not in my body. They're somewhere else, and I'm sharing them with Newton and everyone in the past. And it's like this weird mindset of, wait a second, then who am I?
Right? I'm just the current conglomeration of atoms and molecules and isotopes. You know what I'm saying? It's just, to me, that proves a very controversial idea, which is that, I am just a receiver to my consciousness. I love this idea because it's a better explanation than I'm just, the collection of atoms that seemingly change over time, and I'm not the same collection of atoms that I am as a 30-year-old than when I was at 18.
And so every scientist would tell you, I don't know anything about consciousness.
Right, because you can't define consciousness. It's such a
why not? Why don't we just say, hey, you know what? We don't know what consciousness is, but we do know there is something that drives us, and it tends to make people spiritual and connected with something outside of them. And then we see this when people even take psychedelics, we see that experience ignite in them, and they let go of their old self.
Yes.
Which A science book can't explain how you let go of your old self. It just can't.
Not currently.
Yeah. Like when you wake up and you say, hey, when your wife tells you you're pregnant, I'm gone. I was gone. I'm a new Isaac all of a sudden.
Right.
Where's the hypothesis on that?
How do you test for that?
How do you test that? Like, oh, and so that's where man, we could go on hours for hours, and I know I got to go because I got things to do today, and I really loved, I think this is something we got to continue on, but it's like, I think what's going to be important about you and I discussing this more is people that are listening right now that don't want to believe. I don't think they know what they're not believing because, first of all, they want to read it. I think there's a lot of bad actors that, use the Bible as, it's kind of like a knife. The Bible can be used as a knife. I heard at Flatiron's Church. He kind of used an analogy that a lot of people have felt stabbed by the Bible. And other people like to use the Bible as a knife, but as a tool, to have on their belt when they need it, to, help with daily activities and stuff like that. Similar to a knife. There's bad actors. And I think it has turned a lot of people off of religion. And I think in today's times where we're disconnecting from each other and we're raising up junk values. We need more in life. We need more of this. We need more things. We need to look better. We need this. Instead of trying to find meaning of taking on responsibility and being a good individual for yourself, your family, and then your community, we need a little more religion. We need it. And it's weird because what I love is our story is we come from that science, and we still very much science. We believe in evolution. We believe in science. We believe in all the things that science books are telling us, except the idea that they're just acting like religion is just some kind of virus. And that's just incorrect. It's just straight up incorrect. And Brett Weinstein debated Dawkins, and I think Dawkins got blindsided that this evolutionary biologist is like, hey, religion is part of our biology now. It just is.
Yeah. I mean, there's a time where humans needed it in order to survive. So like at just subconscious level, like it's somewhere in our DNA, coded in there. And at the other point, it's like, you have,
that's all right.
But, I was going to say that, who is it? Who's the Cosmos guy?
Neil deGrasse
Sagan?
Tyson. Oh,
No,
Sagan.
Sagan and Neil. So you got Sagan in him. I read his book, Dragons of Eden, right? One would think it might be about the Bible or reference it. It really doesn't. Although he starts at least one of the chapters, if not the beginning of the book, quoting, I forget which part of the Bible is. I wish I really knew the numbers in the chapter like I should. But he's like, he quotes this one person who says, I'm a brother of dragons and a friend to owls. This is how I figured out, by the way, how that dragons and jackals are kind of mistranslated sometimes, because sometimes it's read, I'm a brother to jackals and a friend to owls. Point being is that at the end of the book, Carl Sagan goes into all the things that are a waste of time for science to explore, in which case telepathy and ghosts and, religion in general, a bunch of things that maybe some of them on the list were kind of like silly. But at the other part, there's like, do you really think that we can exclude, without a doubt, that ghosts don't exist? Given that we can't observe all human observation at all time, that we're well equipped to explain all phenomenon just here on Earth. Forget the rest of the universe. Just all phenomenon here on Earth. I mean, like, you don't believe in ghosts, but then we have the Bermuda Triangle. Like, what's going on over there? You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't believe in the idea that telepathy could have been a thing back in the day, and by the way, like, and that could have mechanics that work that could potentially be explained with science or quantum
But maybe
physics.
there was narrative structures like the monster in the dark. If you're camping, if you're by a fire with your tribal lands, you are concerned about the shadow in the dark with teeth and eyes, and so you can conceptualize a monster, and that narrative was important to your survival, to be concerned about the creature in the dark. And narratives like Ghost and stuff like that all play into narratives of, hey, we should be at least aware of the strange noises in our house, and maybe we personify them. But maybe those personifications are just pre-science, because most people didn't have science. So just because they're just because the patterns have been labeled by all the science books and all the coincidences and all this and that doesn't mean that those labels, just because you added labels to them, doesn't change the narrative and how it makes people feel and how people react to them.
Totally agreed. And I think, again, context is king. Context is king. And, when not equipped with the language, important circumstance and things are lost. So once we become well equipped with the language in science and religion, when we have that, then we can finally have the conversation about how they can combine. And maybe this can be the end of part 1.
Yes, we'll revisit this. Hey, everybody, thanks for listening to this podcast. I got to head out, but you know what? We're going to talk more about this. What do you say?
Most definitely.